Welcome to Soundscape Books. You're listening to an exclusive audiobook recording of The Strategist's Wife, a psychological thriller by Vivian Black. Like and subscribe for more content.
Chapter 1: The Fractured Nation. The CNN newsroom in 2028 hummed, a relentless machine of controlled chaos Samantha Reed had long since learned to navigate. Screens flickered with the latest polling numbers, scarlet and cobalt in a restless dance. From monitors, the constant chatter of talking heads emanated, each voice a fresh echo of the nation's deep, unyielding fractures. President Thomas Jefferson III's unprecedented bid for a third term, coupled with his administration's controversial interpretations of constitutional law, had stretched the political landscape taut to a breaking point. Samantha, hunched over her keyboard, felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her gut, a dull ache spreading through her shoulders. "Another round of alternative facts from the White House press brief," a voice muttered nearby, followed by a tired, humorless laugh. Samantha barely registered it. Her gaze was fixed on a developing story, a contentious Supreme Court ruling that threatened to further erode voting rights. Truth still mattered. It had to, even when the world conspired to bury it under layers of shifting rhetoric and calculated misinformation. Her fingers flew across the keys, meticulously fact-checking, cross-referencing, carving out a sliver of objectivity from the overwhelming din of partisan noise. She really needed coffee. Her editor, Ben Carter, a man's face seemed permanently scored by the demands of the modern news cycle, walked past her. He paused, tapping her shoulder. "Reed, that PAC analysis, Jefferson Campaign's new one, they're spinning it as grassroots, but I smell something rotten." Samantha nodded, pushing a stray strand of dark hair from her face. "Almost done, Ben." A faint smile touched her lips, fleeting. "Rotten? Try a whole compost heap of dark money." A flicker of grim satisfaction crossed her features. Exposing corruption wasn't just her job. It was a personal mission, a way to honor the integrity she was bound to uphold, a quiet defiance against constant erosion. Later, the newsroom began to thin. The buzzing energy slowly dissipated, yielding to the late DC night. Samantha lingered, lost in the blue glow of her monitor, the lingering hum of the servers a quiet, metallic companion. She felt the weight of the day, the constant push against the current of disinformation, but also a strange sense of purpose. Her father, Senator Alistair Reed, had often spoken of the duty of public service. Though his own story had ended in tragedy, his words still resonated deep within her. The official narrative of his suicide still felt like a raw wound, an unresolved question hovering over her life, fueling her dogged pursuit of answers. The drive home through the quiet DC streets offered a stark contrast to the newsroom's frenzy. Past the silent monuments and shadowed government buildings, her apartment awaited. It was a modest space, filled with books and echoes of memories, a sanctuary from the political maelstrom. She kicked off her shoes, the silence a balm after hours of buzzing. A framed photo on her bedside table caught her eye. Her father, smiling, his arm around her at her college graduation. The glass was cool against her thumb as she picked it up, tracing the outline of his familiar face. A familiar ache twisted in her chest. "What were you really fighting, Dad?" she whispered to the still air, a question that had haunted her for years. The official report had been clear, concise, and deeply unconvincing to her. He wasn't the kind of man to give up, not like that. She set the photo down, her gaze drifting to the city lights outside her window, a sprawling network of power and secrets. A single car alarm wailed somewhere far off, a solitary cry. The nation was fractured, and she felt a part of that fracture, a tiny shard caught between idealism and the harsh reality of a world that determined to break. The quiet contemplation was abruptly shattered by a sharp, insistent ping. Her burner phone, the one she kept for sensitive, anonymous contacts. It was an encrypted message, a string of seemingly random characters that she knew, with a jolt, held significant meaning. Her pulse quickened, the jolt of adrenaline cut through her fatigue. Her stomach growled softly, reminding her she hadn't eaten since lunch. This wasn't a PR blast or rival gossip. This felt different, heavier, like a lead weight settling in her chest. She unlocked the phone, but the thought of turning away, of letting this potential truth slip through her fingers, was, well, it was impossible. She stared at the decoded message, the glowing text a small, bright square in the darkness of her apartment, a silent command she felt compelled to answer. The message specified the DC docks at midnight. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down her spine. She would be there. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Embrace. The biting wind off the Potomac whipped strands of Samantha's hair across her face, mirroring the tight knot of dread in her chest as she navigated the desolate DC docks. Her nose felt cold, almost numb. The anonymous tip, a glimmer of truth on her screen hours ago, had solidified into a leaden weight in her gut. Every shadow stretched and twisted, morphing into potential threats. The rhythmic lapping of water against unseen hulls was the only sound, an oppressive silence save for its liquid whispers. A faint, sweet smell, like burnt sugar, drifted on the wind, oddly out of place, strikingly incongruous with the grim scene. She clutched her worn trench coat tighter, not against the raw cold, but against the insidious premonition coiling in her thoughts. This wasn't just a late-night meeting. This was a descent into something far darker. She found the designated spot, a rusted shipping container casting a long, dark silhouette. She paused, her breath catching, held captive by the looming steel. A figure emerged from the deeper shadows, not with the furtive haste she expected, but with an unnerving, almost leisurely confidence. Her eyes, already accustomed to the gloom, recognized the sharp cut of his suit, the meticulous precision of his movements, and then the face. Dominic Holt, the president's chief strategist, the Serpent. A sudden icy clench seized her stomach. A trap. It had to be. He offered no greeting, only a slight incline of his head. His eyes, sharp, calculating, assessed her with unsettling calm. "You're punctual, Miss Reed." Samantha swallowed, a dry rasp in her throat as she forced down the hot flood of adrenaline. Holt, she managed, the name a brittle sound, steadier than the tremor that still vibrated through her hands. The wind picked up, rustling discarded plastic in a hollow whisper, a stark contrast to the motionless man before her. Near a weathered piling, a single bright yellow rubber duck bobbed absurdly, a splash of defiant cheer in the encroaching gloom. God, what an odd place for this. He produced a sleek tablet. Its screen flared, a sudden, stark light in the gloom. "I believe you were expecting this," he stated, his voice a low, even murmur that carried effortlessly over the wind's howl. He tapped the screen. A document flashed into view, a leaked memo detailing a minor, easily spun corruption charge against a mid-level cabinet member. It was damaging enough to make news, enough to cause a ripple, yet it was controlled enough to be deflected, quickly contained, a calculated distraction. Samantha's journalistic instincts flared, recognizing the familiar, acrid scent of a political maneuver. A diversion. Always a diversion with him. "This is what you dragged me out here for?" she challenged, a flicker of indignation cutting through her apprehension. "A controlled leak? This doesn't expose anything real." He merely watched her, a faint, unsettling smile playing on his lips, a silent acknowledgement of her perception, a predator's quiet approval. "Patience, Ms. Reed." His demeanor shifted. The casual confidence evaporated, replaced by something colder, more predatory. "That was just the appetizer, Ms. Reed." He paused, letting the words hang in the frigid air, thick with unspoken meaning. Samantha felt a prickle of ice crawl up her spine, a deeper, more primal fear taking root. "We need to talk about your father." The world reeled, the docks swaying beneath her feet. My father, Senator Alistair Reed, the man whose suicide still clawed at her, a wound that refuses to heal. "My father," she repeated, the words a strained whisper, tasting of salt and a sudden sharp fear. What about him? Dominic's daze intensified, pinning her in place, inescapable. "He didn't kill himself, Samantha." The words hit her, a concussive force, stealing the air from her lungs. "He was murdered." He tapped the tablet again. The screen flickered, displaying a brief, greeny video clip. It was dark, shaky, almost indecipherable, yet horrifyingly unmistakable. A figure resembling her father, struggling, then a swift, brutal movement, and the sickening thud as a body fell. The image seared itself into her mind, a brand, shattering the fragile peace she'd painstakingly constructed around his memory. A cold, nauseating wave washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Her teeth began to chatter, an involuntary rhythm against the sudden, profound cold that had nothing to do with the wind. This wasn't a political game. This was her life, her family, violently torn apart. "And I know why," Dominic added, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears, sharp and unnervingly clear. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes holding hers, a terrifying blend of practiced sympathy and cold, hard leverage. "There's a conspiracy, Samantha, a high-level one. Your father was getting too close." He offered the tablet to her, the image still frozen on the screen, a silent, damning testament to his words. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing his. A jolt, cold and electric, passed between them, a shared secret born of violence. The urge to scream, to deny, to turn and run warred inside her, with a desperate, agonizing need to know. It was an ugly, visceral fight, tearing at her composure. He was a serpent, she knew, a master manipulator, but he held the key to a truth that had tormented her for years, a festering wound in her soul. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally choked out, her voice raw, catching in her throat like a sob. Dominic's expression softened, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that only made him feel more dangerous, more cunning. "Because I believe in truth, Miss Reed, just like you." He paused, letting the implication hang, a baited hook. "And because I need your help to expose it, but you have to play by my rules." He leaned in slightly, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, barely audible over the wind. "Meet me again, tomorrow night, same time. I'll explain everything." Samantha stared at him, the horrifying image of her father's final moments still burning behind her eyelids, a ghost in her vision. Her journalistic ethics screamed at her, "Expose him, unmask the serpent for the world to see." Samantha stood alone, the cold wind biting at her exposed skin, but it was the chill in her bones that truly froze her. The phantom image of her father's murder remained, vivid and agonizing, burned into her retina. Her world, once defined by clear lines of right and wrong, had just shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, leaving her adrift on a dark, unknown sea. Her journalistic duty, once a guiding star, was now inextricably linked to a dangerous personal quest, orchestrated by the very man she should have been exposing. A heavy silence settled, thick with the weight of unspeakable questions and the chilling certainty that she had just sealed her own fate. As she finally turned from the docks, the city lights ahead shimmered, not with promise, but with the grim anticipation of a journey from which there would be no return. Chapter 3. Forced Proximity. The evening air bit sharper than before, a raw chill that made Samantha hunch her shoulders. Ahead, the designated rendezvous point shimmered, a secluded rooftop bar, its garish pink neon smeared faintly across the slick, rain-kissed pavement. A place where secrets could easily be swallowed by the city's ceaseless murmur, or maybe just forgotten. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to dismiss Dominic Holt as the dangerous charlatan her rational mind knew him to be. Yet the image of her father and the horrifying implication of his murder held her captive, a cold knot tightening in her gut. He was already there, a silhouette against the city lights, his posture casually assured, almost predatory. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down Samantha's spine. "Samantha," Dominic greeted, his voice a low thrum that seemed to cut through the city's ambient noise, somehow louder than it should be. "Right on time. Good." He gestured towards a discreet, unmarked vehicle idling nearby. "We don't have long. Things are escalating faster than anticipated." She eyed the car, then him, a flicker of suspicion warring with the desperate need for answers. What was she getting herself into? The question lingered unvoiced. He opened the passenger door, a silent command. As she slid inside, the scent of expensive leather mingled with something acrid, faintly metallic. Gunpowder, she realized with a jolt, hinting at an encounter she hadn't witnessed. The enclosed space felt suddenly suffocatingly small. Dominic settled into the driver's seat, his movements precise, economical. He didn't look at her. "I've got more for you," he began, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "Confirmation of what I told you, the players involved, the motive, the cover-up." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It's bigger than you think, Samantha. Your father was digging into something that threatened the very foundations of this administration. They silenced him." He spoke with a chilling conviction, weaving a narrative so compelling, so horrifying, that it almost overshadowed the gnawing doubt at the back of her mind. Could he simply be making this up? She found herself wondering if he ever got tired of talking, or if his throat ever went dry. The words flowed from him, relentless. Suddenly, a harsh, blinding light erupted behind them. Tires screeched. Dominic cursed under his breath, his hand instinctively dropping to a hidden compartment beneath the dash. "They've found us," he growled, his face now a mask of grim determination. Before Samantha could fully process his words, the world outside the car exploded. Glass shattered inwards, a cacophony of gunfire ripped through the night. The car lurched violently as Dominic slammed on the accelerator, weaving erratically through what felt like an invisible storm of bullets. Samantha screamed, ducking instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs. Raw, animal terror seized her. She found herself relying entirely on the man beside her, her hands clammy, useless. Dominic, despite the chaos, remained unnervingly focused, barking orders into a discreet earpiece. He didn't even flinch when a bullet pinged off the passenger side door just inches from her head. "Stay down," he yelled. The tires squealed in protest as another volley of shots peppered the rear of the vehicle. "They're trying to box us in." The chase was a blur of flashing lights, roaring engines, and the horrifying rhythm of gunfire. She could feel the vibration of the road through the cheap floor mat, the impact rattling her teeth. Samantha clutched the dashboard, her knuckles white, her breath catching in her throat with every near miss. It felt like an eternity before Dominic executed a daring maneuver, taking them off the main road and into a maze of darkened alleys. The silence that followed, broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing and the distant wail of sirens, was almost as terrifying as the attack itself. Dominic pulled into a deserted warehouse loading dock, cutting the engine. He turned to her, his eyes intense, his jaw tight. "That was too close," he said, his voice strained. "They're not playing games. We're compromised, both of us." What was that?" Samantha stammered, still trembling, the metallic taste of fear thick in her mouth. Who were they?" "The people your father was investigating," Dominic replied, his gaze unwavering. "The same people who murdered him, and now they know about you, about me." He paused, a beat too long. "There's only one option left: federal witness protection. It's the only way to keep us alive, and the only way to get this story out." He offered no room for debate, his words cold and undeniable, hanging in the air. A brutal reality she couldn't escape. A new, heavier layer of tension settled in the car, making her skin prickle. Before she could object, he was already moving, guiding her out of the damaged vehicle and into another, waiting SUV, its windows tinted black. The next few hours blurred into a dizzying haze, frantic travel, hushed instructions, a profound sense of disorientation. She kept thinking she'd left her apartment door unlocked, a stupid, nagging worry in the face of everything. Her gaze instinctively flickered to his. The silence of the safe house pressed in on her, vast and unsettling, as she looked at Dominic, now just Elias, across the pristine room. He was the key to her father's murder, her unwitting captor, and now her husband. The word hung in the sterile air between them, a cruel, impossible joke. The election clock was ticking, but for Samantha Reed, tenacious CNN reporter, time had stopped. She was no longer herself, merely a ghost in this gilded cage, waiting for a morning that felt like it would never come. Chapter 4: The Domestic Facade. The quiet hum of the safe house's HVAC system was the only sound Samantha registered as she slowly surfaced from a restless sleep. The sterile white walls and minimalist furniture offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of her confinement. For a fleeting moment, she almost forgot, almost reached for her phone to check the morning headlines. Then, the cold wave of her new, fake identity washed over her. She was no longer Samantha Reed, tenacious CNN reporter. She was Elias Vance's wife, a phantom existing in a gilded cage. She pushed herself off the plush mattress, silk sheets rustling softly. The unfamiliar rooms, each impeccably furnished, yet devoid of any personal touch, felt more like a stage set than a home. A quiet unease settled over the meticulously kept living room. Dominic was already up. A low murmur of voices drifted from the kitchen, a constant, low thrum in the background, reminding her of their forced proximity, her captivity. She paused at the doorway, watching him. He was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, his back to her. He looked up. His eyes, unreadable, met hers for a brief second before he offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. He then turned back to his call, leaving her standing there. "Morning, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a smooth, even tone that grated on her nerves. "Just Samantha," she corrected, the words sharp despite her wariness. "We're not on camera." The forced intimacy of their situation chafed, a constant, low-level irritation she couldn't quite shake. He merely smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. The first few days settled into a strange, unsettling rhythm. They blurred into a monotonous cycle of forced politeness and unspoken tension. Meals were eaten in silence, punctuated by clipped, functional sentences. They navigated the small shared spaces with an almost absurd politeness, each movement an unspoken apology for existence. Dominic spent hours hunched over a secure laptop in the study, his face illuminated by the screen, a silhouette of focused intensity. Samantha tried to occupy herself. She read the limited selection of books provided, watched carefully curated news channels, and found herself constantly, almost unconsciously, observing him. Her reporter's mind, a finely tuned instrument, catalogued his habits, his expressions, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. Every gesture, every glance, every controlled breath became a data point, a clue in an unfolding story. One afternoon, Dominic emerged from the study, a stack of documents in his hand. His movements were precise, economical, as he entered the dining room. He laid them out on the polished table, transforming it into a makeshift war room in their domestic facade. Printouts, graphs, and redacted reports soon covered the surface. "This is what your father was working on," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Samantha's breath hitched. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages, a mix of fear and desperate hope churning within her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up a document, the dense text blurring at the edges. The pages detailed a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts allegedly linked to a shadowy political action committee funding President Jefferson III's campaign. Illicit campaign finance, money laundering, and a network of corrupt officials reaching the highest levels of government were laid bare. Dominic began to explain, his words painting a picture of a vast, insidious conspiracy. "He was close, Samantha," Dominic continued, his gaze intense. "Too close. They couldn't risk him going public." Her journalistic instincts, dulled but not dead, began to stir. She absorbed every word, every detail, yet a tiny, persistent voice whispered at the back of her mind. Something felt too neat, too perfectly packaged. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, a premonition. She picked up a report, her finger tracing a name mentioned in the text. "This Senator Davies," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "I remember an article about him last year. He was supposedly a staunch opponent of the PACs. Wouldn't he be an unlikely ally in this?" Dominic's gaze remained steady, unblinking. "Davies is a chameleon, Samantha. Always has been. He plays both sides, waiting for the right moment to strike. He's a key player in their counter-narrative." His explanation was smooth, too smooth. Samantha watched his eyes, searching for a tell, a flicker of uncertainty. She found only a practiced neutrality, an unnerving control. His composure was absolute, a wall she couldn't penetrate. The cold knot in her stomach tightened further. Later that evening, the tension in the house was a palpable thing. They sat across from each other at dinner, the clinking of cutlery the loudest sound in the elegant dining room. The table, set for two, felt less like a shared meal and more like a carefully orchestrated standoff. Samantha felt her skin prickle under Dominic's occasional, lingering gaze. It wasn't overtly sexual, but it was possessive, a silent assertion of his control. What was that look? A warning? A challenge? Or something else she couldn't name? A dangerous current that both repelled and, to her disgust, fascinated her. A strange, undeniable attraction, born of forced intimacy and shared danger, began to simmer beneath her carefully constructed composure, a betrayal of her own resolve. Dominic cleared his throat, drawing her attention. "We need to discuss our cover story more thoroughly," he said, breaking the silence. "In case of what?" Samantha challenged, her voice sharper than intended. "In case we encounter anyone," he replied, his tone calm, almost paternal. "A delivery, a maintenance check. We need to be convincing." Every fiber of her being rebelled against the charade. He meticulously outlined their fictional life. A chance meeting at a charity gala, a shared love for obscure indie films, even the name of their imaginary golden retriever, Apollo. It was absurd, humiliating, and terrifyingly real, a performance she was forced to play with her life as the stakes. As he spoke, he leaned forward, his hand briefly brushing hers as he pointed to a map of a fictional honeymoon destination. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but it sent a jolt through her. A spark, unwelcome and electric, shot through her arm. She pulled back, her heart hammering, disgusted by her own reaction. The next morning, the fabricated conspiracy continued to unfold. Dominic presented her with what he claimed was a coded message intercepted from one of the conspirators. "This is a direct order," he explained, pointing to a series of seemingly innocuous numbers and letters. "It outlines the next phase of their plan to discredit your father's legacy. She would not be a pawn in his game." Samantha feigned a look of grave concern, but inside, her journalistic instincts were screaming. The pieces didn't quite fit, a puzzle with too many convenient solutions. The message felt staged, too easily deciphered. Her mind, honed by years of investigative reporting, began to dissect the narrative, recalling seminars on psychological operations, the art of crafting believable fictions, and false flag operations designed to distract from the truth. She decided to test him again, more subtly this time. She needed to find the cracks, to push at the edges of his story. That evening, during their sterile dinner, the hum of the safe house's systems seemed to amplify the silence. The air was thick with unspoken questions, punctuated only by the soft clinking of silverware. Samantha casually brought up a recent news item she'd seen on the controlled channels, a minor scandal involving a local councilman. "Did you see that piece on Councilman Evans?" she asked, making eye contact. "They said he was involved in some shady land deals. Reminds me of that senator you mentioned earlier, the one who was supposedly so principled." She watched Dominic closely, her breath held, every muscle in her body taut. Her gaze fixed on his face, searching for any tell, any flicker. For a fraction of a second, a micro-expression flickered across Dominic's face, a tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible clenching of his jaw. A fleeting shadow crossed his features, vanishing as quickly as it appeared, before his usual mask of calm snapped back into place. "Ah, Evans," he mused, taking a slow sip of water. "Yes, a different caliber of corruption entirely, more petty greed than systemic manipulation. The senator you refer to, however, had a far more sophisticated understanding of how to pull the strings. It's a different game at that level, Samantha. He smoothly diverted, but Samantha had seen it. There it was, the tell. That fleeting slip confirmed her deepest suspicion. He was lying, not just withholding information, but actively constructing a false reality, controlling the narrative, shaping her very perception. A cold certainty settled in her stomach, replacing the earlier confusion. The fog of uncertainty lifted, replaced by a chilling clarity. She was trapped with a master manipulator, playing a game she hadn't fully understood until now. She would play along, for now, but her true investigation had just begun. As Dominic continued to speak, spinning another thread in his intricate web, Samantha offered a small, non-committal nod, feigning agreement. Her mind, however, raced, dissecting every word. She had to find the real truth, not just about her father, but about Dominic's true role in this elaborate charade. Her father's death was still a mystery, but now Dominic was too. Later, as she prepared for bed, she moved towards her bedroom, the silence of the house pressing in. She glanced towards the study, where Dominic was still working, light spilling faintly into the hallway. He looked up from his screen, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. His gaze, usually so guarded, held a complex mixture of control, calculation, and something else, an unexpected spark that sent a shiver down her spine. A flicker of possessiveness, a hint of something dangerously close to admiration, blurred the lines between captor and confidant, between enemy and something dangerously close to an ally. The unsettling intimacy of their shared deception was a dangerous current, a silent promise. Samantha quickly averted her gaze, deeply unnerved by the unsettling connection she felt, and a dangerous game she was now truly a part of. A knot formed in her stomach, but it was a knot of steel, not fear. She wouldn't wait for morning, wouldn't allow herself another moment of passive agreement. The real truth, she knew, lay not in Dominic's carefully spun narratives, but in the digital whispers he thought he controlled. Her fingers, restless and alive, already anticipated the cool press of a keyboard, the quiet hum of a screen, the solitary hunt for answers that would begin tonight. Chapter 5. Whispers of Truth. Samantha sat hunched over the antique writing desk, the dim glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows across the otherwise sterile sanctuary. The stillness was absolute, broken only by the refrigerator's faint thrum. The air, thick with the scent of aged timber and the subtle, sterile tang of the air purifier, seemed to press in. Samantha noticed dust motes dancing in the screen's light, a fleeting, irrelevant ballet in the oppressive quiet. Her chair, a stiff wooden thing, dug into her lower back. Her fingers, usually flying across a keyboard in a bustling newsroom, now moved with deliberate, almost clumsy slowness, navigating the clunky interface of the old machine Dominic had provided. Despite the frustration, a stubborn ember of defiance ignited within her. Each click, every typed search term, became a small act of rebellion against the carefully constructed reality Dominic had spun around them. She was looking for cracks, for anything that didn't align with his narrative of her father's death. Her quest led her through labyrinthine encrypted government databases and the murkier depths of obscure online forums. Her eyes, gritty with strain, began to ache. Days blurred into a relentless, monotonous rhythm of research. Samantha delved into digitized newspaper archives, sifted through dusty government reports, and past the cryptic language of obscure political blogs. Her journalistic instincts, long dormant, stirred beneath the surface of her feigned compliance, a predator scenting a trail. Each day was a blur of information, a relentless hunt for truth through a miasma of planted fictions. Dominic, a shadow in the periphery, would often materialize in the doorway. A mug of steaming tea cradled in his hands, his gaze would sweep the room, settling on her with unsettling perception. "Finding anything useful, Samantha?" His voice, smooth as polished glass, was almost too casual. He'd offer seemingly helpful suggestions, guiding her towards specific figures or events, his expression a carefully modulated blend of control and sympathy. Samantha would pause, a beat too long, the silence stretching, before offering a non-committal nod, making a show of taking notes. "He thinks he's so clever," she'd silently seethe, meticulously filing away his suggestions for later, more critical cross-referencing. Her outward demeanor was one of diligent cooperation, a threadbare veil over a mind that dissected every syllable he uttered, searching for the tell. One afternoon, while digging through records of a minor congressional subcommittee hearing from years ago, a detail snagged her attention. The faded digital document, buried deep in a forgotten corner of an obscure archive, seemed innocuous enough. It was a tiny, easily overlooked inconsistency. A specific date a key witness had supposedly testified, a date Dominic had pointed to as crucial in her father's dealings with alleged enemies. A tiny, chilling knot of dread began to coil in her gut, a whisper that something was profoundly wrong. The official record placed the witness out of the country, yet Dominic had unequivocally implied their presence. She cross-referenced flight manifests, then passport stamps, her suspicions solidifying into an unwelcome certainty with each confirmation. Her hands froze over the keyboard, a chill spreading from her fingertips up her arms. As if sensing the shift in her focus, Dominic entered the room, his gaze immediately sweeping the laptop screen. "Anything interesting, Elias?" he asked, using their fake names. Her composure, however, was a threadbare veil. She minimized the window with a jerky motion, her heart lurching with a sudden nervous beat. Later that evening, during their ritualistic, forced dinner, Dominic deftly wove a new thread into his deceptive narrative. The meal was a tense affair, the clinking of cutlery on ceramic stark in the hushed room. Samantha pushed a piece of bland chicken around her plate, the faint rumble in her stomach a protest against the charade. He spoke of her father with an almost reverent tone, weaving a narrative of a supposed clandestine meeting between Senator Reed and a shadowy figure. This detail, crafted to resonate with Samantha's raw grief and longing for answers, struck a deep chord. "Your father was a man of principle, Samantha," he murmured, his gaze locking with hers, "but such men often make powerful enemies." The emotional weight of his words was a powerful undertow, threatening to drag her back into his carefully constructed story. A small, vigilant part of her, however, remained anchored to the subtle currents of his manipulation. She felt herself torn, suspended between the comforting fiction he offered and the unsettling reality she was unearthing. And then there was the other, more unsettling current, a strange, unwelcome attraction that flared in those moments of perceived vulnerability, a confusing heat she desperately tried to ignore, a shameful weakness she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Days blurred into weeks, each passing one tightening the knot of anxiety in Samantha's stomach. Her hands often felt a persistent chill, even in the insulated warmth of the house. This secluded dwelling, once a prison of isolation, now felt like a suffocating box, its walls closing in as Samantha's internal conflict intensified. She needed an outside line, a way to verify her burgeoning suspicions without arousing Dominic's vigilance. The need for definitive answers became a gnawing emptiness, a constant ache. If Dominic discovered her attempt to reach out, her life, and potentially the life of any contact, would be in even greater jeopardy. The potential consequences were daunting, a chasm opening beneath her. But the alternative, remaining in this comfortable, suffocating trap, a puppet in his narrative, was far worse. Yet the thought of her father, of the truth buried beneath layers of lies, galvanized her forward, a silent, unyielding force. She began to formulate a desperate plan, a complex strategy to send a message without leaving the slightest trace. It was deep into a late-night session, Dominic presumably asleep in his room down the hall, that Samantha stumbled upon it. The laptop's screen's blue light was the sole illumination, painting the silent room in eerie, shifting shadows. She was cross-referencing a list of attendees from a charity gala her father had attended months before his death, a list Dominic had provided as part of his evidence of her father's dangerous associations. Her fingers, fueled by a feverish energy, flew across the keyboard. She found an archived photo, a blurry image unearthed from a local newspaper's social page, depicting the gala's main benefactors. The grainy black and white image was barely legible, a mosaic of indistinct faces. Yet one face stood out, sharpening into focus. It was a minor political donor, a man Dominic had painted as a key player in her father's downfall. Her breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary gasp. She recognized the man. But the caption beneath the photo, a simple list of names, identified him as Mr. John Davies, not the name Dominic had used. Dominic had referred to him, the same man, as Mr. Elias Spike, a far more sinister alias. The discrepancy hit her like a physical blow, a cold wave of sickening realization. A profound dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone, seeping into her marrow. This wasn't a minor inconsistency. This was a deliberate fabrication, a carefully chosen name designed to evoke a specific negative image, a villainous archetype. The meticulously constructed facade of Dominic's narrative crumbled, splintering around her. This wasn't a mistake. This was premeditated deceit. Her heart thrummed against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and nascent anger. The air hissed from her lungs in a silent gasp. This single, undeniable factual discrepancy shattered the final vestiges of doubt. Dominic was lying about everything. The truth, stark and brutal, finally revealed itself. He wasn't her protector. He was her captor. His story, a meticulously crafted cage. A surge of icy, unyielding fury, sharp as a barb, replaced her fear, hardening her resolve into an unbreakable core. With trembling hands, Samantha closed the image. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate thoughts. She had to act, fast. There was no more time for hesitation. Her very survival depended on immediate, decisive action. She remembered an old, almost forgotten trick from her early days as an investigative reporter. A coded message hidden within a seemingly innocuous digital artifact. Her journalistic instincts, long dormant, jolted back to life with a fierce, vital energy. She accessed a rarely used public forum, one she knew her former editor, Mark, occasionally scoured for obscure tips and whispers. With practiced ease, she navigated the shadowy, less traveled paths. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she clicked. The message vanished into the digital currents, a tiny, almost invisible ripple, a digital ghost now adrift in the ether. Samantha leaned back, utterly drained, the silence of the sanctuary pressing in, amplifying the frantic beat of her heart. A fragile, flickering hope stirred within her, a tiny flame against the encroaching darkness, but it was overshadowed by the monumental gamble she had just taken. If Dominic found out, it was over, not just the mission, but her life. Now all she could do was wait. Wait in this gilded cage, where the sterile hum of the ventilation system was a constant drone, and the distant murmur of Dominic's television was the only other sound. Wait, and pray that someone on the other end would recognize the essence of truth she had sent before the walls closed in for good. Chapter 6. The Midpoint. A glimpse behind the curtain. The sterile hum of the safe house's ventilation system was Samantha's only constant companion, a quiet drone beneath the low murmur of the television news. The air felt a little too dry, her throat scratchy. A minor irritation in a place designed for absolute comfort, where every sensation was meant to be muted, controlled. She'd been idly watching President Jefferson III's latest campaign rally, the familiar rhetoric washing over her, when a specific analyst's face flashed across the screen. A woman with severe glasses and an even more severe haircut. Dominic, engrossed in a worn copy of The Art of War on the adjacent sofa, stiffened. His eyes flickered to the screen, then quickly away, back to his book. But not before Samantha caught the fleeting tension in his jaw, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "That's an interesting take," Samantha mused, her voice carefully neutral. The old journalist's instinct to probe, long dormant, sparked to life. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noting how his knuckles had whitened slightly around the book's spine, almost bleached against the faded leather. Dominic merely grunted, turning a page with an exaggerated rustle. "More partisan drivel," he said, not quite meeting her eye. "They're all just pawns, Samantha. Don't waste your energy." His tone was dismissive, but the usual smooth veneer of composure was just a hair too tight, like a poorly fitted mask. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the sharp-tongued political scientist on screen, was a known critic of Jefferson III, a voice Dominic usually derided with cynical, practiced ease. His current silence, his sudden aversion, felt less like a dissonant note and more like a jarring, off-key chord in the quiet hum of their days. Later that day, Dominic stepped away to make a call in the other room. His voice was too low to discern, as usual. Samantha felt a surge of restless energy, a nervous tremor deep in her bones. Her stomach surprisingly growled, a mundane reminder of lunch she'd barely touched. She rewound the news segment, pausing it on Dr. Reed's severe face. Her mind raced, connecting this moment to a dozen other seemingly minor inconsistencies she'd dismissed as paranoia. She'd told herself she was simply hyper-vigilant, a journalist out of her element. But the pieces now began to click with an unsettling precision. There was the time Dominic had accidentally left his tablet unlocked, displaying a cached email from a J. Sterling, a name she now recognized as being associated with a powerful lobbying firm that had recently shifted its allegiance to the president. Then there was the way he'd carefully steered her away from any news reports mentioning Senator Alistair Finch, a figure increasingly vocal about internal dissent within the president's party. She'd thought it was just him being overprotective, a guardian against unnecessary stress. But now, the truth, stark and chilling, didn't coalesce. It slammed into her. He wasn't fighting the conspiracy. He was part of it. The evidence he'd been feeding her, the elaborate narrative about a shadow cabal trying to undermine the president, wasn't to expose corruption. It was to control the story, to redirect attention, perhaps even to discredit a legitimate threat to Jefferson 3. A cold, terrifying clarity replaced the initial surge. A wave of nausea washed over her. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. When Dominic returned, she was pretending to read a magazine, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He offered her a glass of water, his expression unreadable, though she thought she caught a flicker of something, a question, in his eyes.
"Everything all right, Samantha?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk, perhaps a touch too smooth. "Just thinking," she replied, forcing a casual smile that felt brittle on her lips. "About the election. It all feels so staged sometimes, doesn't it?" She watched his eyes, searching for a flicker, a tell, anything that would give him away. He just nodded slowly, taking a sip of his own water. A beat of silence stretched, taut as a wire. A few days later, during a quiet afternoon, while Dominic was downstairs, presumably in the gym, Samantha found herself drawn to her father's old study. The room, meticulously recreated to mirror his own, felt like a cruel touch. A constant, potent reminder of the man she mourned, designed to reinforce Dominic's narrative of a devoted daughter seeking truth. It was a lie, she now knew, but the comfort of the familiar was still a lure. She ran a hand along the underside of his antique desk, a habit she remembered from childhood, a game they used to play. Her fingers brushed against a faint, almost invisible seam, a hidden compartment. Her breath hitched, a sharp intake of the dry air. With trembling hands, she pressed. A small drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender, was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her father's distinctive, elegant script. She also noticed a small, faded photograph tucked beneath the journal. Her father, much younger, laughing with a woman she didn't recognize. A fleeting, irrelevant thought, a whisper of a life she never knew, but it stuck with her. A cold dread, heavier than anything she'd felt before, settled in her chest. The journal wasn't a diary of everyday life. It was a chronicle of fear, of secret meetings, of names and dates she didn't recognize but sensed were important. He wrote in code, a complex system of metaphors and political allusions she slowly began to decipher. The serpent's head was not just one man, but a hydra, its tendrils reaching into every branch of government, every major corporation. Her father hadn't been fighting a single conspiracy. He was battling a systemic rot, a profound, pervasive rot. The blood drained from Samantha's face, leaving her skin feeling tight and cold. A profound betrayal, layered on top of her grief, settled deep in her bones. She clutched the journal to her chest, the leather warm against her trembling fingers, a strange comfort in its weight. The grief she'd carried for so long, the anger at Dominic's manipulations, now sharpened into a cold, hard blade of resolve. Her father hadn't been a pawn in Dominic's game. He had been a warrior, silenced for fighting a battle far larger than she could have ever imagined. The stakes were no longer just her father's memory or her own journalistic integrity. They were about the very soul of the nation, and she was now holding the map to its darkest secrets. And the man who held the first key, the man she had trusted, was sitting in the next room. Her gaze hardened, already calculating. Chapter 7. Escalating Stakes. Samantha watched Dominic across the polished dining table, a hunter studying its prey. The sterile hum of the safe house was a constant, low thrum, a stark contrast to the knot tightening in her gut. Her coffee, usually a comfort, tasted like ash, a simple, bitter fact. Her resolve, once fragile, had solidified. The revelation that he was no ally but a master manipulator had honed her senses, transforming every interaction into a silent war. She would uncover his secrets, no matter the cost. She cleared her throat, drawing his attention from the secure tablet he was examining. Her movement was subtle, a quiet shift in her seat. "Tell me, Dominic," she began, her voice deceptively casual, "what exactly is our contingency plan if this safe house is compromised?" Dominic's eyes, usually unreadable, flickered for a fraction of a second, a nearly imperceptible tell she was now trained to spot. A ripple of something unidentifiable crossed his features, quickly masked. He responded with a carefully crafted deflection. "Our protocols are robust, Samantha. Rest assured, every angle has been considered," he replied, his tone reassuringly calm. Samantha nodded slowly, feigning acceptance. Her mind, however, was already dissecting his words, searching for the crack in his facade. Each syllable was a thread, and she meticulously tugged at it. Later that morning, as Dominic made a call on a satellite phone in the next room, Samantha subtly moved towards his open briefcase. Her movements were fluid, almost soundless. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic beat against the quiet hum of the safe house. The risk felt immense, a precipice, but the potential reward, the truth, was a chasm she had to cross. This drive for truth was now an inferno within her. She would not be deterred, not by fear, not by Dominic. Her fingers brushed against a loose document, a seemingly innocuous report, but her gut screamed otherwise. Her touch was light, almost clinical, as she pulled it free. She quickly memorized a few lines, a name, a date, before he returned. Funny, the way the light caught the dust motes in the air, like tiny slow-motion stars. Each detail, a piece of the puzzle, was carefully filed away. That afternoon, the subtle dance continued. She tested him again. "Dominic," she said, her voice laced with a hint of challenge, "about that report I saw earlier, it mentioned some discrepancies in the supply chain." "Anything I should be aware of?" He met her gaze, a faint, barely discernible smile playing on his lips, as if he knew she was playing a game and relished the challenge. His eyes held a glint of amusement, a perilous spark. His response was a blend of half-truths and plausible deniability. "Minor logistical adjustments, Samantha, nothing that impacts our operational security," he assured her, his tone smooth as silk. "Logistical adjustments," she echoed, a brow arching, "or creative accounting." He chuckled, a low sound. "Same thing in our line of work, wouldn't you say?" Samantha felt a flicker of grudging respect, quickly extinguished by a fresh wave of loathing. The man was sharp, a snake. The intellectual sparring was exhilarating, perilous, and utterly captivating. Every exchange was a jolt, a high-stakes gamble. As evening approached, the day wore on, a silent battle of wills fought over mundane tasks and carefully chosen words. The air grew heavy, pregnant with unspoken words and simmering suspicion. That evening, a different kind of tension hung in the air, dense and suffocating. As they sat across from each other, the remnants of a sparse dinner between them. Outside, a chill wind rattled a loose pane in the window, a lonely sound. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows, distorting their faces. Dominic poured them both a glass of wine, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. The clink of glass against glass was the only sound, echoing in the quiet room. "A long day," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The vulnerability in his tone, however fleeting, caught her off guard. It was a crack in his armor, unexpected and disarming. Her guard, so meticulously constructed, began to fray at the edges. The forced intimacy, the shared peril, the sheer intellectual force of their constant game, it had all woven a strange, undeniable current between them. A charged awareness hummed in the space separating them, a perilous allure. Their eyes met across the table, and for a fleeting second the careful facades slipped, revealing something raw and exposed beneath. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a shared vulnerability. Hate and desire warred within her, a jumble of conflicting feelings. He reached across the table, his fingers tracing the rim of her glass, a silent invitation. His touch was light, yet it sent a jolt through her. His eyes held a perilous promise. The air thickened with unspoken desires and bitter resentments. The tension was a living thing, pulsing between them. Then, inevitably, the space between them collapsed. His lips found hers, urgent and demanding. It was a furious, desperate collision, tasting of wine and deceit, a betrayal of her principles, and a surrender to something she couldn't name. A part of her screamed in protest, another yearned for more. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken consequences. The kiss broke as abruptly as it began, leaving them both breathless, its weight heavier than any confession. A profound silence descended, broken only by their ragged breaths. A wave of shame washed over Samantha, quickly followed by a terrifying realization. She wanted more. Her carefully constructed world felt suddenly off-kilter, desire warring with self-preservation. Dominic's daze was unreadable, a deep quiet behind his usually placid exterior. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't decipher. He stood, moving away from her, putting physical distance between them. The emotional chasm, however, felt wider than ever. He turned his back. "We need to focus," he said, his voice strained, barely a whisper. The fragile moment shattered with a deafening crack. The sound ripped through the quiet, violent and abrupt. The wall beside them exploded inwards, showering them with plaster and splintered wood. Dust and debris instantly filled the air, obscuring their vision. The safe house, once a sterile prison, became a fortress under siege. Chaos erupted, the sanctuary transformed into a war zone. Dominic moved with terrifying efficiency, his political strategist facade replaced by something primal. His hand was already on a hidden weapon. He drew a compact pistol from beneath his jacket, his movements fluid and practiced. "Incoming!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the din. "Down! Get down!" he roared, pulling her to the floor as another volley of gunfire erupted. His grip was firm, unyielding, forcing her to safety. Samantha, despite the terror, found herself reacting, instinct taking over where training had left off. Her body moved without conscious thought, a surge of adrenaline sharpening her focus. The air filled with the stench of gunpowder and ozone, punctuated by the shouts of unseen assailants. Flashes of muzzle fire lit the darkened room, painting fleeting, terrifying images. Dominic fired back, precise and ruthless, a stark contrast to the composed man she thought she knew. Each shot was deliberate, aimed with deadly accuracy. "Stay low," he commanded, pushing her behind a heavy overturned sofa. "Cover me," he barked, reloading with an expert ease. She saw a figure at the breached wall, raising a weapon. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy lamp, throwing it with surprising force. The ceramic shattered against the wall near the intruder, a frantic, effective diversion. The assailant recoiled, giving Dominic a precious second to take them down. Their actions were synchronized, a desperate, unlikely team, moving in brutal concert, their lives definingly. Finally, the assault ceased. The silence that descended after the last assailant fell was heavier than the gunfire, dense with the smell of smoke and fear. The ringing in her ears slowly faded, replaced by the frantic thumping of her own heart. A tremor, deep and visceral, shook Samantha's body, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Every muscle ached, every nerve ending felt raw, but beneath the shock, a cold dread began to settle. Dominic, bruised and bleeding from a graze on his temple, slowly rose. His eyes swept the wreckage, assessing the damage, the casualties. His movements were stiff, but his focus remained sharp, professional. He turned to her, his gaze intense, raw, his eyes, usually guarded, now wide open, reflecting the chaos and the shared ordeal. Their eyes locked across the devastation of their supposed sanctuary, amidst shattered glass and splintered furniture. The room was a testament to violence, a stark backdrop to their silent exchange. A strange, unsettling connection had forged between them in the heat of battle. What had just happened, in the crucible of violence, was undeniably real and deeply complicated. The world felt irrevocably shifted. She had hated him, desired him, and just fought alongside him for their very lives. The lines, already blurred, had now vanished completely, leaving her more confused and entangled than ever before. Her understanding of him and of herself was utterly shattered. But in that wreckage, amidst the lingering scent of gunpowder and the unsettling new bond, a fierce, desperate resolve began to harden. The election was hours away, a ticking clock she could no longer ignore. Her window of opportunity was closing. Chapter 8. The Cracks Show. The tremor in Samantha's hand was barely perceptible as she adjusted the delicate mechanism of the old safe-house window latch. Her stomach clenched, a tight knot of dread, battling a fierce, stubborn resolve. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, deafening drum in the absolute silence. Days had been spent observing Dominic's patterns, mapping out the blind spots in the surveillance. Now, with the election just hours away, her window of opportunity was closing. The plan was meticulously crafted, a blueprint for a desperate escape. She pictured the route, the overgrown path to the hidden service road, the prearranged signal for her contact, the rush of freedom she so desperately craved. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Samantha froze, breath held tight in her chest, a chill snaking up her spine. It was likely just the settling of the old house, but here every whisper of sound was a potential betrayer. She waited, counting slowly. Had she remembered to turn off the coffee maker? The thought was absurd, fleeting, gone as quickly as it came, before she resumed her task. Finally, with a soft click, the latch gave way. The sound echoed, too loud, in the hushed house. A sliver of cool night air, thick with pine and damp earth, seeped into the sterile room. She slipped her pre-packed bag, light yet packed with essentials, through the narrow opening. Her gaze swept the room one last time. A knot of revulsion tightened in her gut, mixed with a strange, unwelcome familiarity. This place, her prison, had become a crucible. Stark and cold, the room was illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. She was just about to follow, one leg already poised on the windowsill, when a voice, calm and utterly devoid of surprise, cut through the night. "Leaving so soon, Mrs. Vance?" Samantha froze. Her foot slipped slightly on the sill, a jolt of pain shooting up her ankle. Her stomach lurched. She spun around, heart plummeting, to find Dominic silhouetted in the doorway, a dark shape against the dim light filtering from the hall. His eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto hers. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips. "How long?" Samantha managed, her voice a strained whisper, the fight draining from her. The question hung heavy between them. Her journalistic instincts screamed for answers, for the truth, but a deeper, colder part of her dreaded what those answers might mean for her father. Dominic pushed off the doorframe, moving with a quiet, predatory ease. "Long enough, Samantha." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Long enough to know you wouldn't stay. Long enough to know you couldn't resist. You're a reporter, after all, and reporters, they always dig." He stepped closer, invading her space. His presence, suddenly overwhelming, seemed to steal the air from the room. "You knew." It wasn't a question. "I always know," he replied, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "It's my job to anticipate, to control. You, my dear, are simply a variable I've learned to account for." The air grew heavy, the silence between them thicker than any words left unsaid. "You can't keep me here," she retorted, a flicker of her resolve igniting. Dominic chuckled, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Know what, Samantha? My story? Or the messy, inconvenient truth about your father?" Her breath hitched. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of her father, the man she knew, with Dominic's damning words. This was the threat she dreaded most, sharp and cold. He moved past her, casually closing the window. The soft click of the latch echoed, sealing the finality of her failed attempt. "You have this romanticized notion of Senator Reed, don't you?" Dominic asked, turning. "The principled hero fighting the good fight. He was that, yes, but he was also a man caught in something far more tangled than you can imagine, something he helped build." Samantha stared, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about?" "Your father, Samantha, wasn't just investigating corruption," Dominic explained, his voice even. "He was part of it. Not willingly, perhaps, not initially, but he made compromises. He took money. He traded favors. All in the name of the greater good, of course. To get close, to expose them from within." The words hit her, a cold, sickening weight in her stomach. The room seemed to tilt, her world shifting beneath her feet. "Lies!" she hissed, though a cold dread was already taking root deep within her. "You're trying to discredit him, to break me." "Am I?" Dominic's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Or am I trying to protect his legacy? To protect you?" He pulled a small encrypted data chip from his pocket. It glinted faintly in the dim light. "This contains everything. Every offshore account, every illicit deal, every backroom whisper where your father's name is mentioned. Not as the hero, Samantha, as a player." Her gaze fixated on the chip, a tiny dark rectangle holding all her worst fears in its silent depths. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand the stakes," he replied, his voice hardening, losing its earlier playful edge. He took a step closer. "The people your father was trying to expose, they're still out there." The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on her. His words, cold and sharp, carved a chasm in her soul, forcing her to confront an impossible choice. But the sheer impossibility of it ignited a defiant clarity. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed red, each second a hammer blow against her conscience, counting down to the moment she would claim the unvarnished truth. Chapter 9. The Reckoning and the Choice. The safe-house air, usually just stale and heavy, now thrummed with a different kind of energy, a low vibration against Samantha's skin. Her neck ached, a persistent protest from hours hunched over the old laptop, but a cold, sharp resolve kept her gaze fixed on the screen. She meticulously cross-referenced her father's journal entries with her own recently discovered facts, the faint glow illuminating his frantic, familiar scribbles.
Each line in Senator Reed's worn notebook felt less like a breadcrumb and more like a tripwire, pulling her deeper into a rabbit hole she'd never imagined. A sudden, almost absurd thought flashed through her mind. Did Dad always write his G's like that? Then Dominic's face swam into view, eclipsing her father's script. Every inconsistency he'd ever uttered, every subtle shift in his eyes, every carefully placed piece of evidence he'd fed her, clicked into place with a gut-wrenching clarity. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a sprawling, systemic rot, a cancer spreading through the highest offices. She traced the connections, the names, the dates, until the truth, ugly and undeniable, solidified. Her father hadn't just been murdered, he'd been silenced. Not for a simple cover-up, but because he was about to expose a network of corruption so profound, so entrenched, it reached far beyond the president, implicating figures Dominic had seemingly been protecting all along. A faint sound, the familiar click of the front door, made her muscles lock. Dominic, back. She closed the journal, placing it carefully beside the laptop, its worn leather still warm from her touch. She drew a deep, steadying breath, the kind that did little to calm the frantic beat against her ribs. The confrontation had been building for weeks, a slow, simmering burn beneath the surface of their manufactured peace. He walked into the living area, his usual composure a little too stiff, like a suit that didn't quite fit. His gaze swept over her, then snagged on the table where her research lay, a subtle tightening around his mouth. "Samantha," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we need to talk." She met his eyes, her own gaze hard, unwavering. "Yes, we do, Dominic, but I think I'll be doing most of the talking." He paused, a flicker of something, surprise, alarm, crossing his face before his practiced calm slid back into place. He moved further into the room, his eyes scanning the space, assessing. "About what, precisely?" "About my father," she stated, her voice tight, a thin wire of controlled fury. "And about your lies." She picked up the journal, holding it out, the worn leather warm against her palm. "This isn't a suicide note, Dominic. This is a ledger of corruption that led to his murder." His eyes narrowed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You don't understand what you're looking at, Samantha," he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Your father was compromised. He was playing a dangerous game." "He was trying to expose it," she countered, rising to her feet, the chair scraping loudly behind her. "He was investigating the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the dark money flowing into your president's campaign and beyond. He was close, Dominic, too close." She laid out the printouts, a stack of damning evidence, the coded messages from her father's journal, the cross-referenced news articles she'd found. Each piece was impossible to refute.
She rattled off the timeline, the names, the hidden connections that linked the president's inner circle to a sprawling network of illicit dealings, and her father's final, desperate attempt to bring it down. Dominic listened, his face a carefully constructed blank, but she could see the cracks forming, a subtle tick near his left eye. The narrative he'd woven for her so painstakingly began to fray. He tried to interject, to dismiss her findings, but she cut him off, her voice rising, sharp with each truth she unearthed. "You didn't put me in witness protection to save me, Dominic. You put me here to control the narrative, to feed me a version of the truth that would protect your people, your president, and ultimately, you." As the weight of her words settled, a new silence descended. The air between them felt heavy, charged with unspoken accusations, and the dense weight of their twisted history. Dominic finally broke it, his voice low, rough, no longer the smooth instrument she knew. "And what if I was, Samantha? What if I was trying to protect a fragile peace? What if the truth you hold isn't just dangerous, but catastrophic?" He moved closer, his eyes intense, almost pleading. "Your father was a good man, but he made mistakes. He got entangled. Exposing this, all of this, will not just destroy his legacy, it will ignite a civil war. Do you truly understand the implications?" Samantha stared at him, her jaw tight. "I understand that my father died trying to do the right thing, and I understand that you covered it up." A long silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years of lies and the raw, undeniable truth. Then Dominic's facade crumbled. He looked away, his shoulders slumping, a deep weariness settling on to his features. "He was a complicated man," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, rough with unspoken grief. "He wanted to do good, but he was trapped. He was going to bring it all down, and they couldn't allow that, not with the election so close, not with everything at stake." He turned back to her, his eyes red-rimmed, exposed. "I tried to warn him, I tried to protect him, and when I couldn't, I tried to protect you." His gaze locked onto hers, a desperate, almost broken plea. "I never meant for you to get hurt. I never meant for you to fall into this. I couldn't let them have you too." The feeling intensified, a cold fist clenching in her chest. The air in the room thickened, not with tension, but with a sudden, unexpected vulnerability that stole her breath. His confession, so raw and uncharacteristic, cut through her anger, landing somewhere deep and unsettling. He reached for her, his hand hovering, uncertain, almost trembling. "Samantha," he breathed, his voice laced with a genuine deep pain she hadn't known he possessed. I fell for you. In the midst of all this, I fell for you." And it made everything so much harder. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. The confession of his feelings, so starkly at odds with his ruthless manipulation, plunged her into a dizzying confusion. She wanted to recoil, to lash out, to scream. But his raw honesty, the undeniable pain in his eyes, held her captive. This was the man who had lied to her, manipulated her, held her captive. Yet in this moment he was utterly exposed. A terrifying part of her felt a pang of something akin to understanding, if not forgiveness. She even noticed, for a fleeting second, the faint, almost sweet scent of his aftershave, a detail utterly irrelevant to the crisis at hand, which meant the choice was hers, and hers alone. The digital clock on the old television blinked, a stark, unforgiving reminder. The election was hours away. The fate of the nation, her father's legacy, and her own life now hinged on a single, impossible choice. She had the truth, the full, ugly, unvarnished truth. She could expose everything, blow the entire conspiracy wide open, knowing it would shatter her father's perceived honor, ignite public outrage, and undoubtedly put her life in extreme peril from the very powerful people she was about to expose. The seconds ticked by, each one a dull thud against her conscience. The nation held its breath, unknowing, poised on the edge of a decision that would define its future. On the television screen, the election countdown graphics flickered, stark red numbers shrinking with terrifying speed. In the quiet, isolated safe house, Samantha Reed felt the last vestiges of her indecision crumble, replaced by a grim, cold resolve. It wasn't triumph or even certainty, but a bitter knowing. Her gaze, now steady, fell to the laptop, where the meticulously crafted article lay waiting, the cursor blinking patiently at the end of the file. With the clock ticking down to mere minutes, she knew what she had to do. The weight of it, the terrible cost, pressed down, but the path was clear, sharp, and unavoidable. Chapter 10: Aftermath and Legacy. A cold resolution, sharp as winter air, had settled over Samantha minutes before the election. It propelled her forward now, though her fingers, steady despite the tremor deep within her, hovered over the keyboard. Her stomach gave a faint, forgotten growl, a mundane protest against the enormity of the moment. The weight of a nation, the ghost of her father, and the calculated gamble of her own future pressed down. She saw the headlines already forming, the fury, the chaos. A part of her recoiled, whispered, "Stop!" But her gaze remained fixed on the screen, on the article she had meticulously crafted, the truth she had painstakingly unearthed. This was the cost. This was the fight. With a breath held captive in her lungs, she pressed send. The immediate silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the frantic hum of the city outside. She waited, suspended in that strange, hollow calm between action and consequence. The first ripple came not as a wave, but as a faint, distant tremor. Her burner phone, placed deliberately on the worn wooden table, vibrated. Then a deluge. News alerts began to spill across the old laptop screen, each headline a shockwave against the carefully constructed facade of power. Across the digital feeds, a firestorm ignited. Pundits, politicians, and the public reacted with a mixture of shock, outrage, and frantic speculation. Samantha's story had struck with the force of a seismic event, tearing through the president's final hours of campaigning. The carefully orchestrated narratives Dominic had built were crumbling, exposed as intricate lies. Samantha watched, a cold certainty settling in her gut. The initial reports focused on the most damning accusations, irrefutable evidence of financial malfeasance, the deliberate suppression of dissent, all tied directly to President Jefferson III's inner circle. Meanwhile, in a secure, undisclosed location, Dominic Holt watched the same digital conflagration unfold. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable calm, was etched with a grim acceptance. He ran a hand over his scalp, feeling the rough stubble. He'd known this moment would come, had even accounted for Samantha's unwavering resolve. His phone buzzed. "Holt?" A furious, clipped voice barked. "What in God's name have you done?" Dominic listened, a muscle ticking in his jaw, the silence on his end a statement in itself. "What was necessary?" he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of apology or explanation. He had played his hand, and Samantha had simply played hers better. The thought was a bitter swallow. The hours blurred into a cacophony of breaking news. Her eyes ached, dry and gritty, from staring at the screen. As the initial shock faded, a quiet realization began to form. The political landscape, already volatile, fractured into open conflict. Protests flared in major cities, fueled by a deep-seated anger and the sudden validation of long-held suspicions. Samantha, still in her secluded hideout, absorbed it all. She saw the faces of the people, their hope and their fury, reflected in the grainy news footage, a mirror of her own conflicted heart. Her phone rang again. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, her hand shaking a little as she hesitated. "Samantha?" A strained but familiar voice asked, a little static on the line. "It's Maria. We're with you, all of us." The words were a lifeline. The immediate fallout for President Jefferson III was catastrophic. His final rallies dissolved into chaos, his campaign events cancelled amidst a storm of legal challenges and calls for impeachment. Yet the deeply entrenched nature of power meant that even this catastrophic revelation wasn't a death blow. The president's loyalists rallied, attempting to discredit Samantha and her reporting. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously sourced, a fortress against their counter-narrative. Samantha felt a flicker of grim satisfaction, quickly extinguished by the cold realization of the long, arduous fight ahead. This was only the beginning. The weight of their actions, of the choices made, began to set like concrete. Dominic's reckoning was swift and brutal. Stripped of his authority, his carefully constructed network of influence began to unravel like a pulled thread. He found himself isolated, a pariah to the very forces he had so fanatically served. A final tense confrontation occurred, not with the president, but with one of the shadowy figures he had once protected. The exchange was cold, precise, outlining the bare terms of his new reality. No room for negotiation, no appeals. He had gambled everything, not just on the president's survival, but on his ability to control Samantha. And he had lost. The bitter taste filled his mouth. A subtle hum in the city, a new current in the political winds, marked the beginning of a new era. Samantha eventually emerged from her temporary sanctuary, blinking in the unfamiliar light. The world she stepped back into was both familiar and utterly transformed. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of journalistic solitude, was now a buzzing hub of activity. Colleagues, allies, and even former rivals sought her out. Some approached with admiration, others with wary respect, their expressions a mix of awe and calculation. Her career, once defined by her quiet integrity, was now emblazoned with the undeniable mark of a truth-teller. She had faced down the most formidable powers and emerged. The truth about her father, Senator Alistair Reed, was now public, albeit in a raw, unvarnished form. The painful revelations of his compromises, his entanglement in the very corruption he had sought to expose, were laid bare for all to see. But so too was his courage, his desperate fight to protect his family and his nation. She visited his grave. The painful idealism she once held, replaced by a more nuanced, yet profound love and understanding. The weight of his complex legacy settled within her, not as a burden, but as a guiding force, a compass calibrated by sacrifice. The election, despite the political upheaval, remained deeply contested. The nation, fractured but now shaken awake, grappled with the profound implications of Samantha's revelations. There was no easy victory, no swift return to an untainted democracy. The rot was too deep, the divisions too wide to heal overnight. Yet a crack had been opened. A powerful light shone into the darkest corners of power, illuminating what many had chosen to ignore. Samantha stood by her window, looking out at the city of Washington, D.C. The monuments still gleamed, the Capitol dome still rose majestically. But the shadows felt different now, imbued with a new kind of menace and promise. She was no longer just a reporter. She was a survivor, a catalyst, a sentinel in the ongoing battle for truth. The fight for democracy, she knew, was not a single event, but an unending struggle, a constant vigilance against the forces that sought to manipulate and control. And as the faint glow of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, she knew she would be ready, forever changed but unyielding in her purpose. Epilogue, 18 months later. The autumn wind swept through Arlington National Cemetery, scattering crimson leaves across the carefully tended graves. Samantha Reed stood before her father's headstone, a simple granite marker that bore his name, rank, and the dates that bookended a life cut violently short. Senator Alistair Reed, a man of principle, murdered for his principles. She knelt, placing a bouquet of white roses at the base. The trial had taken 11 months. The evidence she'd smuggled out through that coded message had been enough to launch an FBI investigation that tore through the administration like wildfire through dry timber. Mark, her former editor, had recognized the pattern buried in that forum post immediately, the same journalistic code they'd used years ago for sensitive tips. He'd passed it to the right people. Federal agents had raided the safe house 3 days later. "They found all of it, Dad," she whispered to the cold stone. "The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the money laundering operation. Everything you were investigating before they killed you." Her fingers traced the engraved letters of his name. The official cause of death had finally been amended: homicide. It had taken a special congressional investigation, 3 grand juries, and testimony from 47 witnesses, but the truth had emerged from beneath years of carefully constructed lies. President Jefferson III's third-term ambitions had died in spectacular fashion. Impeached, convicted, and currently serving a 15-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. His chief strategist had been more difficult to nail down. Dominic Holt, the Serpent, had vanished the night of the raid. Federal marshals found the safe house empty, save for Samantha locked in her room and a laptop containing a meticulously organized archive of evidence. His evidence, his files, his insurance policy, left behind like a final twisted gift. The manhunt lasted 8 months. They'd finally found him in Montenegro, living under an assumed name in a seaside villa. Extradition proceedings were ongoing, but Samantha had already been deposed as a witness. She would face him again in court. The thought sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Not fear, but something more complex. Rage, grief, and beneath it all, a disturbing current she refused to name. He had lied about everything. The conspiracy he'd described was real, but he hadn't been trying to expose it. He'd been orchestrating it. Her father had been getting close to the truth, close to unraveling the financial web that sustained Jefferson III's unconstitutional power grab. So Dominic had him eliminated, then used Samantha as an unwitting pawn, feeding her just enough truth mixed with fiction to keep her confused, controlled, and isolated. The evidence he'd shown her was half-fabricated, designed to misdirect her investigation toward convenient scapegoats while the real conspirators operated freely. Only his final act, leaving his genuine files for federal agents, remained inexplicable. His attorneys claimed it was evidence of a guilty conscience, a last-minute attempt at redemption. Samantha didn't buy it. Dominic Holt didn't do anything without calculation. Perhaps it was simply the ultimate control, choosing his own ending, dictating the terms of his capture, ensuring his story would be told his way. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. The CNN press pass hung from her neck. They'd rehired her 6 months ago, after the media storm surrounding her testimony had finally died down. She was working on a different beat now, investigative features rather than daily political coverage. Some wounds ran too deep for a simple return to the battlefield. Her therapist said the nightmares would fade eventually. The ones where she was back in that sterile safe house, Dominic's eyes watching her from every shadow, his voice a constant whisper in her ear. "You should have been a strategist, Samantha. You see things others miss." She'd wake gasping, drenched in sweat, reaching for a phone that wasn't a burner, in an apartment that was truly hers. "I got them, Dad," she said to the headstone, her voice stronger now. "All of them, just like you would have wanted." A jogger passed behind her on the cemetery path, earbuds in, oblivious. Life moved on. The nation was slowly healing from the constitutional crisis that had nearly torn it apart. A special election had been held, new leadership, promising transparency, though Samantha had learned to temper her optimism with hard-won cynicism. She pulled her coat tighter against the autumn chill and turned toward the parking lot. Tonight, she was meeting with a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell her father's story properly. Tomorrow, a congressional medal ceremony. Her father would receive posthumous recognition for his service. Small consolations, but consolations nonetheless. As she walked between rows of white headstones, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, international code. Her breath caught. "You were always meant to find the truth. I just showed you where to look. D." Her hands trembled. Montenegro. His lawyers had claimed he had no access to outside communication. Clearly, even behind bars, even facing decades of imprisonment, Dominic Holt found ways to reach her. One final manipulation, one last invasion of the fragile peace she'd built. She should forward it to the FBI, report it immediately. Instead, she deleted it, blocked the number, and kept walking. He didn't get to haunt her anymore. She'd reclaimed her truth, her voice, her life from the man who'd tried to cage her. That was victory enough. The cemetery gates closed behind her with a hollow clang. Samantha Reed climbed into her car, started the engine, and drove toward the city, toward work, toward purpose, toward a future her father would have been proud of. The past was laid to rest. The truth was told. And for the first time in 18 months, she felt free.